and welcome to MOD. We are the Museum of Discovery and we are in Adelaide. If you want to visit us, we look at a lot of science and art, and we are found on North Terrace at the intersection between North Terrace and Morfett Street Bridge. My name is Debbie. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about one of the characters that features in our current exhibition, and we're going to be talking in the being bathed by the glow of the moon today, which is pretty exciting. Our current exhibition is called 7 Siblings from the Future. So you'll meet 7 people who live in 2050 and explore some of the choices that they might have to make in their world. One of these people is Ava. So I'm going to bring you over actually to Ava, and we're going to meet them and learn a little bit about what their life might be like as somebody who lives in 2050.
My parents genetically engineered me to be super intelligent so I could become a memory scientist. However, I'm more interested in space. I'm searching space for life that's more intelligent than my siblings. The last test of Austronaut School is tomorrow. I always get perfect scores, but working with others is not my forte. I get easily annoyed by slow-thinking people. I really want to be an astronaut. I have to pass this test so I can make my dreams come true. The only trouble is, I don't have anyone here to practice with. I've been practicing alone, but maybe we could give it a go together?
Yeah,
I bet you can't do it.
Oh, well.
Oof. Harsh.
Hello, Ava. A little bit of sass in the morning, afternoon actually, I think it is. Alright, let's try and do this. Ava's not great at working together with people. I'm not great at using my brain and talking at the same time. So, let's see how we go. This particular exhibit asks you to bump in buttons as fast as you can, and it's a little bit easier when you do it with someone else. What's really interesting when it comes to Ava, do you see? I can't brain and talk at the same time. What's interesting when it comes to Ava is that Ava has been genetically modified to be super intelligent, but they are not doing great in this particular place or area of their test because they find it specifically difficult to work with people. This brings up a lot of questions when what did I press? A7.
A7.
Yeah. This brings up a lot of questions because when we're looking at intelligence, it's clearly not just the ability to put something in your brain and remember something and work through those ideas, but communication and emotional intelligence and social intelligence is also a really big part of having a functioning society. So Ava missing out on those particular skills, while it probably has nothing to do with the fact that they were genetically modified, has a lot of issues when it comes to trying to say this person is better than other people because of this one particular skill. So clearly in this particular regard, maybe they're not doing quite so well as someone else who has that higher EQ as opposed to IQ. C5 to D4. I know that it's going to start counting down and I'm going to get
Flustered.
I always panic when I hear the number. I hear the button. E9. See, my brain literally just disappears. Okay, come on.
Interesting definition of literal there.
Thanks for your help. I need a lot more practice before tomorrow's placement test. But there's one last thing. I still don't know what specialisation I'm going to choose now that I'm almost finished Austronaut School. Could you help me to choose?
Feel free to chime in with, decision is already made.
The decision was astrobiology. I'm just going to preface our little chat here today with the fact that I'm a geneticist. So Ava's very interesting because there are lots and lots of different things we can talk about in terms of space travel, how we're going to be using space in the future, as well as things like defence. But I know a lot more about genetics than I can ever know about engineering and space travel, so I'm going to have a little bit of a focus on that. But I'll try my best. Something interesting when we're looking at genetic modification is how it works and when it works. Genetic modification is a process whereby we look at the DNA structure, we look at that particular genetic code and we make small changes to that code. That's a very different thing from another topic that's called transgenics, where you are taking DNA from one animal or plant and moving it into a creature of a different species. In this particular case, we're already starting with Ava's DNA, Ava's genome, and just making small changes to that. One of the ways that Ava might have been genetically modified is through a process called CRISPR. That's a very popular process that we have right now and is currently our most efficient and quickest form of genetic modification. You have this came from bacterial defense mechanisms against viruses. They found certain sequences of invasive viruses and they sent mechanisms, different proteins, to come and chop that DNA up, or chop that RNA up actually. Once that was all chopped up, the virus can't survive and off it goes. It doesn't go anywhere because it's dead. So we've taken that same mechanism to use in science as well. We can choose a very specific part of DNA. In fact, it's only 20 nucleotides long, 20 units of letters long. The human genome is 3 billion nucleotides, so it's highly specific. We can go and find that very specific part of the DNA, make a little chop, and make a slight mutation. Sometimes you can add a little bit of DNA in there as well. This might have been one of the techniques that was used on Ava, but it brings up a lot of ethical issues, because in order to have a genetic modification be present in every single cell in the body, the only time that you can do this process is when something is a single cell, so just after fertilization of the egg when it comes to animals, which means people can't actually give consent to that kind of thing. And that's a controversial and ethical issue that we need to think about. Doesn't matter so much with plants because plants never give consent anyway. But when we're looking at the topic of Ava and Ava's parents wanting them to be a memory scientist, that means they did a procedure well before they were born, well before they were even conceived, that is kind of influencing their life quite a bit. But Ava doesn't want to be that thing. She doesn't want to be a memory scientist. They want to work in the astronautical sphere. So what kind of changes does that make psychologically to a person? Is it the same as saying, no, you're going to be this particular career because we put these genes in you? What kind of things does that look at? It brings up a whole plethora of ethical questions.
So it's a bit of a question of, if we design people to be good at specific things, then there's even more pressure on that person to follow the path that their parents or whoever it is wants. So that's one side of it.
Yeah, that's actually really good, because that means we can then look at the analogy of if a baby is born and you do some sort of surgical procedure to them as a baby in order to influence what they'll be like in the future. Is that okay, or is it not okay? In which case, how does genetic modification come into that? What? So many things that we can ask. It's also extra interesting because Ava has had genes in their body modified that are associated with intelligence. That's another difficult question, because there's no single gene that is responsible for intelligence. There's most likely so many genes that we don't even know about, and genes interact with each other. The proteins that are made from these genes interact with each other, so taking one away might not necessarily be effective. In Ava's case, it seems like it was effective. Do we know if there are any off-target effects? Are there other effects from this genetic mutation? We're not entirely sure. And one potential reason for that is when we are looking at genetic modification, as scientists, we go through extremely rigorous procedures of testing over generations these kind of mutations and the effect they have on a plant. So I study plants, they're my favourite. I love plants so much. I'm a little bit like Ava here, prefer non-humans sometimes. And with my research...
Controversial?
I know it's controversial, but plants are amazing. In my research, it was very important to confirm that any mutations I had done to my organism, in my case rice, that I had established there was no other extra effect. And that took me 5 or 6 generations of these plants, of breeding them together to make sure nothing was happening. Can you do that with humans? And can you do that within 30 years? So, I don't know. Poor Ava has to worry about all of, well, I guess they don't actually worry about it, but these are all the things that Ava's parents may have thought of before coming to that. You also get into other issues, like what if we're not doing it for something that almost universally people see as a beneficial trait, such as intelligence or overcoming some sort of autoimmune disease, but something more cosmetic, like how someone looks. Where do we draw the line? Is it different when we're doing it to an adult to target a specific tissue to help heal that particular tissue or fight a certain disease, as opposed to doing it when they are just an embryo? So those are some of the things. But if we go back to the idea of I keep saying Julia because I have talked about all the siblings today a lot. Ava was genetically modified because their parents wanted them to become a memory scientist, but Ava doesn't want to do that. Ava wants to explore space. Ava wants to be an astronaut, an Australian astronaut who goes into space and has quite a few different options of where they want to go. That's their particular passion. They want to explore space. They want to understand more about space and how it relates to humans. And in an age where we are on the brink of having even more interaction with space than we currently have, that's really exciting. No wonder Ava wants to look at these things. But what is that going to look like? Is it going to be as simple as we will be able to make it to space and we will be able to build machines that will get us to space so quickly that we can literally look at a space hotel as a place that is achievable for people to visit? Do we want to go to the moon? Do we want to build our space hotel on the moon? Is that possible? What kind of things are we going to be overcoming in terms of atmosphere, in terms of gravity? Are these places engineering is going to take us in the future? Are we going to be searching space for more life, like the astrobiologists, asking questions about what creates life, what causes life, what kind of conditions sustain life? Are we going to be looking at a money-making industry of astrotourism, space tourism, people going out into these other planets, into the stars for fun? Are these the kind of things we're going to be looking at? And probably a more interesting question to me is, I'm pretty sure we'll get there one day if we're still around, but how long is that going to be? Because historically, and you'll know more about this, Samuel, please chime in anytime you want, but historically, between the time we learnt to fly and the time we went to the moon is such a short period of time. What can I relate when I'm looking at whether I, as a random citizen of Earth, can just go up to space and have a look at Earth?
Well, I suppose it's similar with the genetic side of things. We talk about how fast the technology grows. Because in 2001, was it around then that the human genome was sequenced first?
I can't remember. I'm not a historian.
But it was cost about 100 million to do that. It now costs about 1,300. So broadly speaking, a lot of these things are a question of will the ethics and our frameworks for asking whether these things are right or whether they're ethical is probably going to lag behind our ability to actually do these things. So that applies to space travel, genetics, robotics.
Because the thing with space travel, if you're also looking at it from an ethical standpoint, it's currently extremely expensive. Does that mean when looking at things like space tourism, is it going to be limited to the elite, the ones with the money? And what what does that mean for us? Does that create class division, or does it decrease class division because we now have a lot more information about how our world looks? This is an exoplanet. These are the kind of planets that Ava might be looking at if they are looking at space colonization. So they're trying to maintain the certain conditions we have on Earth, a very similar sized planet, but also a similar type of atmosphere. One of the reasons when we talk about moving to other planets, we talk about Mars quite a lot as opposed to Venus. But Venus is closer to us and it's a more Earth-like size, but it's not actually, but it's closer to us. But we wouldn't move to Venus because its atmosphere is too far out of what we can personally handle. And I think I have Venus here, don't I? Let's have a look. We have lots and lots of different planets that we can look at. There we go. Let's look at Venus. Venus doesn't have the same type of atmosphere that we have on Earth. And one of the reasons that we can live here without getting too sunburnt, unless you live in New Zealand or Antarctica, is that we have a very lovely ozone layer that is preventing a lot of the radiation to Earth, as well as how thick our different atmospheres are. We're well protected, or relatively well protected, from the sun's harmful rays. Venus doesn't have that, and so that lack of atmosphere makes Venus not only extremely hot because of the core and what's underneath the surface, but because the radiation from the sun is also causing a big problem. So this is one of the reasons why we talk about moving to Mars as opposed to Venus, despite it being closer. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider, not only when we're looking at distance and how quickly we can get to a different planet, but also whilst looking at the atmospheres of the planet. Water. Water is our really, really big thing, and I don't think we can see it on Mars.
Some would call it the big blue wet thing.
The big blue wet thing, yeah, the ocean. I know not water necessarily, but if we go and look at Jupiter, no, I lied. I'm going back to Mars. I've got my brain all wrong. So Mars does have polar caps. We don't know what those polar caps are made of. Maybe there's some water in there. Maybe it's different types of elements that have frozen. But you can see that there is so much we can look at when it comes to space that's well beyond just space colonization or space tourism or anything like that. Looking at astrobiology, those specific amino acids and what we can find. We can also look at how our world is defended when we have that information from space. So we already have a huge amount of satellites. We have lots of stars up here right now which currently don't have any satellites in it, but up in those skies it's actually extremely full. That's where Ava is currently training on a satellite up there, and they are going to be using information from those different satellites to send back to Earth. Things like GPS system, how can we improve those kinds of resources that we have. Looking at human movement around the world, that's all really important when we're looking at controlling a pandemic, because that information can feed back to us. So when we're going into space travel, the more people who live up there and are observing the Earth, the more information we actually have on how to run our specific world. And that's only one of the many things that space has to offer. Plus, it's extremely pretty. So Ava's such an interesting person, and they have so much interesting content behind them because they're kind of this intersection between biology and where that's going to be going, as well as space travel. So I feel like it's very much from the genetic level right to the size of the planet and the exploded galaxy, all in one person, and I think that's really, really amazing. That's all I'm going to say about Ava today. We will be having more talks like these in the coming days with the other siblings, so please make sure you jump in and check them out if you want to know a little bit more about that science. It's been very nice talking to you today, so hopefully I'll see you again pretty soon.
Thanks, guys.